All right, so here we go with our 12th and final session for the rules of golf for our rules officials. We're going to cover rules 21 through 24 today to wrap up the rule book. 21 is going to cover other forms of match play and stroke play, some things such as bogey, par, Stableford. We're going to kind of go over those pretty quick. Rule 22 is going to cover foursomes, otherwise known as alternate shots. We're going to get into that a little bit. 23 covers four ball, which is the rule we'll spend probably the most time with today because most of the competitions that we have don't include rules 21 and 22, but 23 does quite a bit at the club level as well as at the competitive level with four ball and your partner. And then 24 will be the new rule that involves team competitions as we get into that today. So we'll go through those fairly quickly. This shouldn't be too long of a video, but we will make sure that we cover all this information that we need. So beginning with Rule 21, it's divided up into 5 subsets talking about Stableford, the new concept of maximum score that we'll talk a little bit about that we are going to utilize in some of our events here at the Kansas City Golf Association. Par bogey is also covered, a form of golf that's not really used very much, but it's still there in the rules. Then we also have 3-ball match play and then other forms of playing golf that are now accepted by the rules of golf, such as a scramble and different forms of alternate shots that were never really addressed in the rules of golf and were not actually considered forms of golf, but they now are. So some of the notable changes here in Rule 21, again, we're talking about maximum score being something in the rules of golf, which can be something that is set completely by the committee as a straight number, a number in relation to par, a number in relation to your handicap, net or gross, all types of different things that we can do with this maximum score premise. And then we also now, like I said, recognize scrambles, greensomes, and other forms of play not previously supported by the rules. And so we can actually have the USGA answer some questions when we call up about a scramble format. But we will also talk about those as we get in a little bit into this rule. So Rule 21 will cover the ways of the different forms of individual play, such as Stableford, maximum score, and par bogey. Rules 1 through 20 are still going to be enforced. The bulk of the rules of actually getting out on the golf course and covering all the situations that happen during the play of a hole or during the play of a round. But rules 21 and 20 through 21 and 24 are going to cover more of the administrative type of things and just also applying the different forms of golf into these rules as well. So that's what we're looking at 21. So just a quick overview of Stableford, which is something that we will still use in a couple of our events. The normal rules of rules 1 through 20 are going to apply, as we know. They can be set as a scratch or a handicap competition. Doesn't matter. We can set it up in any way to do it for this Stableford. It is an individual play, but can be adapted to have partners involved too, as you know well. Okay, scoring in Stableford is done the same way as far as a scorecard requirement as stroke play, because the Stableford is a stroke play form of golf. The player is only going to be responsible for getting his signature on there, getting the marker signature on there, and making sure his hole by hole is correct. The committee is going to be in charge of making sure that the points are added up correctly and the points for hole by hole are appropriately assigned. So the player does not have that responsibility to add up his points because the rules of golf don't trust golfers to add. All right, so moving on into maximum score, the new rule that we've got there is 21.2. That itself has also got 5 little bullet points that we talk about it within the rules. We'll go over the overview of maximum score, how we score in this type of format, how penalties are applied to maximum score, and whether or not they will affect what we are going to put down as a final score for that hole. Then a couple of exceptions that we've got within maximum score, and then we have to also define when that round ends in maximum score, so we need to make sure that we have that taken care of and so that the round comes to an end and whether or not a player is still operating underneath this rule. So when we look into the overview of maximum score, it's pretty self-explanatory, but what we're doing here, a player or side score for the hole has been capped at a certain number that the committee has set, such as 2 times par or a fixed number set by the committee. So you can see in this example here, we've got a maximum score set up there, so whether or not a player makes that maximum score or goes over that maximum score, their score is going to be brought down to that exact number. And if you notice, even for example there on hole number 7, a player doesn't return a score, they are just going to get that maximum score. There's not going to be a penalty for not holing out, as there is in normal stroke play situations. Okay. So again, a player does not hole out under the rules for any reason, so whether he just picks up or whatever happens, you're going to get the maximum score for the hole. This is not one of those errors that's going to have to be corrected because it is not an error underneath this rule. You're just going to get the maximum score in the situation. All right, all penalties that apply in stroke play are going to apply to maximum score, so again, rules 1 through 20 are in effect. except that a player who breaches any of these 4 rules is not disqualified but gets the maximum score. So like we just talked about, failure to hole out under Rule 3.3, you're not going to get disqualified, you're going to get the maximum score. Failure to correct the mistake of playing from outside the teeing area. So if you tee off outside of the teeing area, in stroke play you are required to correct that error or be disqualified if you tee off on the next hole. But if you're playing a maximum score event, you're just going to get the maximum score for that hole if you fail to go back and fix that mistake. Okay? Failure for correction to playing a wrong ball. So we can see kind of a pattern going on here about how these rules are adjusted in maximum score. If you play a wrong ball in stroke play, you're required to go back and fix that error, except in maximum score, you don't have to correct that error. Whether you do or you don't on purpose or by accident, doesn't matter. You're just going to get the maximum score. So you can hit a wrong ball, say, screw it, I'm done. Let's just move on. I'll take the maximum score. And then also failure for correction of playing from a wrong place when you've committed a serious breach. So we've got these 4 disqualification penalties that occur in stroke play. If we don't fix a mistake, they do not apply in the maximum score. You're just going to get that maximum score for the hole. This could work out really well for our junior tour events, which we are going to apply the maximum score to. We had a situation a few years ago where a player hit a ball into some high grass, couldn't find it, and just dropped one out there, thinking that that was okay, and then he played that ball in, and then he had found his original ball and played both balls in and came in to get a ruling, but unfortunately he didn't do anything correctly in that situation, so he had to be disqualified because he didn't have a viable score for the hole. This new rule that we will have in place will allow this player to not be disqualified and just take the maximum score in that situation. All right, so the exceptions to Rule 11.2. So 11.2 does not apply. So basically, this is the Jordan Spieth rule that we've talked about before, where a ball was stopped in motion, and Jordan Spieth was at the Ryder Cup that we've talked about a couple times, where the ball possibly couldn't be holed, and he just went ahead and stopped it. But at the time, the rule said you can't stop a player's ball in motion, even if it couldn't be holed. So he ended up getting a loss of hole penalty in that situation. But this situation covered in maximum score is if you were putting for a stroke 1 less than the maximum score, you're not going to be penalized if you stop your ball or pick it up or do whatever you want. You're just going to get the maximum score of that situation. There has to be no reasonable chance that it can be holed. And also, it's got to be 1 lower than the maximum score. You don't get to just do this at any time and stop the ball. Say, well, maximum score lets me stop the ball. You know, I'm putting for a 4. Even though maximum score was 10, the rule would not apply. Remember, it's just going to apply if you're putting for a 9 if maximum score happened to be 10 in that situation. Okay, and so when does a round end at maximum score? It's a player's round's going to end when he holes out on that final hole or chooses not to hole out and take the maximum score on that hole. So again, the round has to be defined at some point. So the round will end on that final hole, whether it's hole number 18 or a shotgun event, and they've played their 18th hole for the round. All right, so real quick talking about par and bogey. Par bogey is a form of stroke play that is scored like match play. So it's a very unique situation. Very few people ever play this, but just to let everybody know how this works is you're playing against a par or bogey, which is a set score, and if you beat that score, you get a 1-up. If you lose to that score, it's a 1 down, or if you tie that score, you're going to get that tied there, and we're just going to keep track of how many holes up or down you are, and the player that gets the most holes up wins this. It is a stroke play event, but it is scored, as you can see on the scorecard, very similar to match play, but you could be 5 up through 18 holes. So it's not exactly match play. It is very similar to it, but again, a stroke play format. We won't talk much more about that because we don't really see this event very much. 3-ball match play is a form of match where each of the 3 players is playing an individual match against the other 2. So it's A versus B, B versus C, A versus C, or Mo, Larry, and Curly in this situation here as well. But each match is individual and they don't have an effect on each other match. There are interesting situations where you could have a different score with the same ball going on or 2 different balls going on, depending on penalties that may have been applied in one match, but they will not apply to the other match. Kind of a rare situation, but this does happen when you have 3 people playing together, especially at a club level. They might want to just do a format this way. But there are some interesting rules that do apply where you could have somebody have a stroke recalled, and you'd have to actually go play that ball. Like if somebody played outside the teeing ground or even played out of order, that opponent could recall the stroke, but the other opponent who's not involved in that match has no say what's going on. So that player, myself, would have 2 balls playing at that same time, one against A, one against B, and it's some unique situations going on there as well. So, 21.5 covers other forms of playing golf. And although certain forms of play are specifically covered by our rules 3, 21, 22, and 23, match play, stroke play, whatever, golf is also played in many other forms. Scrambles and greensomes, and greensom is a form of alternate shot. Not exactly the way that alternate shot or foursomes, we're going to talk about here shortly, is played in the rules, but an adjustment. Things like Chapman are actually where you have both players tee off, you switch and you play the second stroke, and then you alternate from there after that with the third stroke, was never a form of golf. And you couldn't actually rule on some of the situations because the rules didn't cover it very well. Now the new rules will cover that. So the committee procedures will cover this. So in our official guide to the rules of golf, we do have all these different forms of golf and some different rulings and different ways that we can present these formats well within the terms of the competition in that guide. All right, so let's start off with a question here to end our Rule 21 discussion. In maximum score set at 8 strokes in a stroke play event, Bailey is in the hole with a 7. She then tells Todd that his putt will break a foot left. What is Bailey's score for the hole? So in this situation, we know that Bailey has given advice to Todd. So we know that that is a violation, and the penalty is the general penalty. And since maximum score is a stroke play event, the penalty would be a 2-stroke penalty. She made a 7 and gets a 2-stroke penalty. Maximum score set at 8, so we've got some math to figure out here that she has made a 9, but her maximum score will be 8. So penalties applied to this do not go above and beyond the maximum score as well. So her score of 8, she's penalized 2 strokes under 10.2a for the advice, and she will put a 9 on the scorecard, and the committee will make sure that it is an 8 when it becomes posted for the event. Bailey is also welcome to put down an 8 on her scorecard there as well if she wanted to, because that is the maximum score. She would not be penalized if she put down a 9 and actually made an 8. So that would be covered in the new rules with maximum score. All right, so moving along to Rule 22, foursomes, also known as alternate shot. Once again, divided up into 5 subsets. We're going to talk about the overview of foursomes, how either player can act for the side. And we've seen this so far in the rules 1 through 20, where we talk a lot about the partner is the player is the partner, and we really spell it out in these rules 22 and 23, and this is where this comes from when we've talked about it in the first 20 rules, where the word partner is never used until we get down to the bottom where it says it does include your partner as well. So we know that rules 1 through 20 do talk about the player and the partner as the same person. The player is the partner is the player. 22.3 talks about the alternating format, and the side must alternate strokes, and those are physical strokes. So penalty strokes will not change the order of play, and that's the way it has always been. That's not a change in these new rules. We're going to define the starting of the round so that we know where a partner needs to be in certain situations to avoid penalty. A little bit of a different requirement of the players in an alternate shot format to where they need to be when the time is to start. And we're also going to define how partners may share clubs. So a notable change, again, I mentioned, is that either player may act for the side, regardless of which player is next to play, such as dropping a ball or declaring a ball unplayable. The old rules, if you were to make the stroke in alternate shot, you were the one that had to drop the ball. Now we allow the player or the partner to act for the side. So that is the most notable change that we're talking about this. So Rule 22 will cover all these alternate shot situations where 2 partners compete together as a side, 1 ball in play, by alternating in making strokes at a single ball. We've always used the term foursomes, means some of the players hitting some of the strokes some of the time, to know what foursomes is defined as. And that's the way it has been and the way it will be moving forward. And so the rules of this form of play are essentially the same for individual play, but we have that exception of who's going to tee off in a certain hole, and every stroke must be alternated until the ball is holed. All right, so we involve partners in this situation where 2 partners compete as a side by playing 1 ball and alternating on each hole. And the way that we will set this up is we are going to do this to where the person who tees off on the odd holes will take care of every odd tee shot, and the person who tees off on the even holes will take care of every even hole tee shot, and who holds the ball does not matter in this situation. Some people play something called true alternate shots, which is something that somebody made up. It's not actually a rule of golf of true alternate shot, where if player A holds out, then player B tees off on the next hole, which is fine. The rules will now cover it, but it isn't a format specifically notated by the rules. So let's look at some different situations that we are talking about specifically to foursomes. Either partner may take any allowed action for the side before the stroke is made, such as to mark the spot of the ball and lift, replace, and even drop the ball in that situation, no matter whose turn it is to play. So keep that in mind for foursomes. We've got a video here of a player dropping a ball who is going to incur a penalty because she's doing it here at shoulder height. And as we've clearly made it known, we're not dropping from shoulder height anymore. Just ask Ricky Fowler. He's pretty well aware of that situation as well. So while this player is dropping from shoulder height, we know that ball is going to be in play, but it's going to need to be redropped if they do not want to get a penalty in that situation. So the lady in the yellow sweater there, even if it's not her turn to play, is putting a ball in play, although incorrectly in the situation. Okay. A partner and his or her caddy may help out the player in any way that other partner's caddy is allowed to help. So the caddy can work for both players, the partner can work for both players, but they still have those restrictions that a caddy has. For example, your partner cannot be back on your line, lining you up. And we've had a very long discussion about that situation, but the caddy can't do it, and neither can your partner. So that covers that rule in 10.3, I do believe, that has got a lot of different discussions going on about what is right, what is wrong, and of course we know the USGA has also redefined what taking a stance means in the sense of this rule, but your partner is included in this rule as well. Okay? You must not give any help other than a partner's caddy that is not allowed to give under the rules. So basically rules 1 through 20 apply to you, your caddy, your partner. Again, the partner's the player, player's the partner. You're going to see this very type of theme very repeated in the rules 22, rules 23, that the partner is the player is the partner. Okay? Any action taken or breach of the rules by either partner or either caddy applies to the side. Since we have one ball in play, we can't just say a penalty to player A doesn't affect player B, because we only have one ball going on in this situation. So the violations of these rules will apply to the entire side. So in stroke play, only one of the partners needs to certify the scores on the scorecard, so we have one little exception there where both players don't have to sign the scorecard to certify it. Just one person for the side has to do that. Okay, on each hole, the partners must make each stroke, and that is each physical stroke, for the side in alternating order. So one partner must play first for the side from the teeing area for all the odd number holes, while the other partner must play first for the side from the teeing area of all the even number holes. This is the specific rule in foursomes of how we play it. Committees and tournaments and clubs may change how you set up different things with who's going to play. You may say men have to tee off on the even holes, women tee off on the odd holes, or you can just set up like we talked about the true alternate shot. It's allowed within the rules, but the specific rule in Rule 22 says we have a player A doing the odd, player B doing the even, and you get to decide how you want to start that. So once we've started that, once we've got a stroke made from the teeing area, we have some certain things that we're going to talk about where the partners now must alternate until the ball is holed. And we're talking about a stroke play event, so we know the ball must be holed, unless we're talking about a foursome stroke play with maximum score. There's an example, or maybe a Stableford, so we can mix these different rules in together. But in stroke play, one of the must rules is that we must hold the ball out. And so that's what we're talking about here in stroke play. Match play is a different situation where the side could be conceded or so on and so forth, or may just pick up and give the hole to somebody else. But we must alternate until the ball is holed in stroke play. If a stroke is canceled or otherwise does not count under any rule, except when a stroke is being made in the wrong order in breach of this rule, the same partner who made the stroke must make the next stroke for the side. So we have a situation where if something happens where we have to go back and replay it. For example, a stroke made from the putting green hits an immovable obstruction on the putting green. That stroke must be recanceled. If I'm the player that does that and Jim is my partner and I make that stroke, we cancel the stroke and I have to come back and do that again because the stroke hasn't counted yet. So even though I'm physically made a stroke, I have to make the physical next stroke as well just because that stroke is not counted as a tally. So if something happens, and it's a rare situation that a stroke will get canceled, but if it's going to count as a physical stroke, that same person needs to do it. All right, so penalty making a stroke in the wrong order in breach of Rule 22.3 is the general penalty. So if you make the stroke in wrong order in match play, no need to correct it because you've lost the hole. We're already done. We're going to move on. Now in stroke play, you're going to get 2 strokes, and we're going to have to correct that mistake. So in that situation, the right partner must make a stroke from where the side made the first stroke in the wrong order. So if Jim and I are partners and I tee off, and then Jim goes out there to the fairway, kind of looks at it and says, this looks good, Todd, go ahead and hit it, and we kind of forget that it's alternate shot, and I make the stroke, we're going to get a 2-stroke penalty, and then anything we do after that doesn't count, but Jim has to come back and play from where my tee shot came to rest with that 2-stroke penalty applied. Okay? So again, the strokes made in the wrong order and any more strokes before that mistake is corrected do not count, and that would also include any penalty strokes that we picked up in that situation. So for example, in the situation where I hit the ball where Jim was supposed to, if I hit it and then Jim goes up there and kicks our ball in play, we get a stroke penalty, but that's going to go away once we come back and fix the mistake for playing out of order. It's a good example of a penalty stroke that would not count. But if we do not correct this stroke, or excuse me, do not correct this mistake before making a stroke on the next teeing area, then we are going to get disqualified. So we can go ahead and even hole out and move on to the next teeing area and still be okay. But as soon as we make that stroke from the next teeing area, that's the trigger point of the disqualification. And then, of course, as we talked about before, the new rule about it being your last hole is when you return the scorecard is that trigger point. It's not when you actually physically leave the last putting green, which was the old rule. So if we don't correct the wrong order mistake, we can get disqualified. All right, so when we start the round, we have to have some stipulations of where the players need to be. And so it's a little bit different for foursome than it is for four-ball or individual stroke play. First of all, the side may choose which partner will play first from the teeing area and starting the round, unless the terms of the competitions dictate that. For example, if the terms said, you know, the women have to tee off on the odd holes, the men tee off on the even holes, then that's fine, and the committee has stipulated that. But if it is not stipulated, the side is going to decide who tees off on one, and then the other player is going to tee off on the even holes, and so on and so forth. And the sides round starts when that partner makes a stroke to start the side's first hole. So the round isn't underway until we actually make a stroke from the first teeing area. Okay? So a little bit of adjustment about the starting time. So Rule 5.3 applies differently to each partner based on who will play for each side. So here we have an example of two players playing in a foursome event. One is teeing off, and the other one is out there on the first tee, which is fine, but she doesn't need to be. There's a situation here that's a little bit different from alternate shot. So the partner who will play first must be ready to play at the starting time and the starting point and must start at that time. But the other player who's going to play next doesn't necessarily have to be there. But they do have to be in a position ready to hit that next stroke. So there is a little bit more of some lenience there about when the second player is there. So the partner who will play second must be present at the starting time, either at the starting point or on the hole where we expect that ball to come to rest. So if Jim and I are partners and I'm going to tee off first, Jim's obviously going to go out there about 375 yards in the middle of the fairway and wait for my tee shot. But if I don't even hit it there, if I mishit one like 300 and it goes off to the right a little bit, Jim's not going to be penalized, or we're not going to be penalized because he's not there. We expected it to be 375 down the middle, so that's where we can be. But Jim doesn't have to be on the first tee with me when I make that stroke. There is a little bit of a thing to think about there, though, but Jim can't be practicing. So when I go ahead and tee off, Jim can't be up there putting or getting a few extra swings in at the range or something like that, because our side has started our round, so we can't practice during the play of a hole. So once I make that stroke, if Jim's not in position down there to see my ball or not at the first tee and he's somewhere else, now we've got a situation where we probably would get a penalty. Definitely would get a penalty if we were making practice strokes during the play of the hole, such as the putting green or the range. So please keep in mind, we have a definition of when the starting of the round happens, and that is for the entire side. Okay? If either partner is not present in this way, then the side is in breach of Rule 5.3. So if Jim and I are both putting, and we're supposed to tee off at 9 o'clock, and we're just not there at the first tee at 9 o'clock, now the side's going to get a penalty. And we would get the general penalty for 2 strokes in stroke play, and we would get a loss of hole in match play, but then we would also have that 5-minute little window there to tee off before 9:05, and then if we didn't after that, we would incur the penalty of disqualification. All right, since we have partners, we are allowing you to share clubs, but it is a very, very strict rule on how you share the clubs. And one of the questions that I always get is if we have 2 partners there with 13 clubs, and they want to share one club back and forth, this is not going to work for you, because it is sharing clubs, plural, not sharing a club. That's the way that I think about this. So if we have 2 partners with 13 clubs, the side has 26 clubs. Okay? You're still allowed to play with just your clubs, but once you share one club, you both now have 26 clubs, which is obviously a violation. So please keep in mind what this rule specifically talks about. If you are going to share clubs, that total cannot be more than 14. So if Jim has 7 clubs and I have 7 clubs, we can share them all the entire time. No problem. But if Jim had 8 and I had 7, we're in violation for this rule, the same as if we both had 13 clubs. So please keep that in mind. All right, so here's a foursomes question for you. In a foursome stroke play event, Doug and Jackie are partners. It's Jackie's turn to tee off on hole number 7. Jackie tees off first, and then Doug tees off as well, as the side forgot they were playing alternate shot. So which of the following is correct? So this is a situation where Jackie is teed off, then it's Doug's turn to play the next stroke. So in this situation, Doug has actually played from the teeing area instead of going out to the middle of the fairway where Jackie's ball obviously came to rest. So we have a wrong order situation. But however, because Doug played from the area that Jackie just played from, as we know in the rules before that we talked about, the side is actually proceeding under stroke and distance. So there actually isn't a wrong order situation. They are replaying the stroke under stroke and distance, which means Doug's ball is in play, and now the side has taken 3 strokes. So Jackie's stroke was 1, but then Doug teed off here when it was his turn to go up there. But it's the same thing as if basically Doug said, well, I'm coming back here and playing this situation instead of going forward. So the rules of golf don't say it's a wrong order penalty. It becomes a stroke and distance penalty. The ball is now in play with the side laying 3. So again, kind of an interesting situation there that the wrong order was played as far as we talk about in English, but the rules of golf cover it saying, well, the side has proceeded correctly under the rules of stroke and distance. All right, so now here we are at Rule 23 already. This is the rule that covers 4-ball, and this is the most common partner form of golf that we will see. We've got a lot of events that have 4-ball, such as the Heart of America, Kansas City 4-ball Championship. Most of our Kansas City Cup events are 4-ball, and most of the events that you see played at club levels have a lot of 4-ball in it too. And your casual rounds that you see on weekends generally is partners playing together against another side. So the 4-ball rules here in Rule 23 are very important, and will also encapsulate Rules 1 through 20, but we're going to adjust some certain different rules here and there. So we're going to talk about the overview of 4-ball, how we score in 4-ball, what do we have requirements for a scorecard for stroke play, what scores count, what scores will not count. We also need to know when the round starts and ends. We have to have that definition for certain situations because it is slightly different for partner play. One or both partners may represent the side, as we've talked about that in foursomes. In 4-balls, we're allowing that to happen as well. But then 23.5 is an interesting take on the rule about a player's actions affecting the partner's play. There was a lot of confusion, especially in the old rules, of when a partner did something, does the other player get a penalty? And the new rules cover it quite well. And when we get down to Rule 23.8, it really spells it out really clearly. And I will go over that in depth with everybody here about when does a penalty apply to the side or just one partner or to the player. It depends on what happens. And Rule 23.8 will cover that as well. The order of play we're going to talk about in 23.6. It hasn't changed. If the side wants to play in any order that they feel, as long as it is their turn to play, they can play in any order that they feel. And then we're going to talk about how we share clubs again. We still need to cover that. And then, as I mentioned, 23.8, we're going to talk about when that penalty applies to just one partner or will it apply to both partners. The notable change in this rule is either partner may take an action regarding the player's ball. Same thing as we talked about in foursomes. So we can drop, we can mark, we can do all those things. Again, partner is the player is the partner. And the purpose of this rule covers 4-ball, where partners compete as a side with each ball played individually. So it's a little different than foursomes, but the 4-ball is the situation where we have one ball in play for one player, one ball in play for the other player, and the low score for the hole is going to count for the side. Hopefully everybody knows this format because it's very popular, but the rules really cover it and make sure we have it defined well. So 2 partners compete together as a side with each player playing his or her ball, and the side scores the lowest score of the 2 partners on that side for that hole, whether it's net or gross. That competition can be held. And then we will talk about the player's responsibilities when we're trying to determine that score here shortly. Again, Rules 1 through 20 will apply to all forms of play, but we've modified them slightly in different situations coming up here, as we will show you. So the side score for hole in match play and stroked play. When both players hole out or otherwise complete the hole under the rules, the lowest gross or net score is going to count for the hole. Pretty straightforward. We know this situation, but it is spelled out here in 23.2a. But when only one partner holes out or otherwise completes the hole under the rules, that score counts and the other partner does not need to hole out. So if Jim and I are playing and Jim has made a 4 and I've got a stroke for a 6, there's no reason for me to go ahead and continue the hole because my score can't count. So I can go ahead and pick up and not record a score. We do need to be very careful in this situation and make sure that the players know that if for some reason Jim's score was to not count after we thought it was, and I don't have a score either, we would not return a score for that hole and we would end up being disqualified in stroke play. So it is important to understand how the scoring works, and we'll get a little bit more in depth with that here very shortly. So if neither player holes out or otherwise completes the hole under the rules, in match play the side loses the hole. So in match play you're only going to lose the one hole. But stroke play, as I just mentioned, if we don't have a score for that hole, we cannot keep on competing, and the side would be disqualified in that situation. So the side's responsibility for the scorecard in stroke play, notice we've highlighted stroke play there as well, because match play doesn't require a scorecard. A match play scorecard is something that is only there as a tool for the players to write the score down, track the match, see where handicap strokes may fall, but not a requirement. Stroke play, we do need a certified scorecard to be returned to us, so 23.2b is going to cover that. So the gross scores for each hole must be entered on a single scorecard. So for example here, we've got the players' responsibilities there in the pink shaded area of making sure that we have a score for each hole, but not necessarily a score for each player for each hole, not necessary. As you can see in hole number 2 there, the top player doesn't need a score, just left it blank, that's fine. We can write an X, we can write anything we want, but the committee's responsibility is going to be there in the blue. The committee's going to say, okay, well, he made a 4, he made a 5, the side score is 4. And so that's what the committee's going to do. The players have no responsibility to do that. And then the committee, of course, again, will take care of the math. In a handicap competitions, each partner's handicap must be entered on the scorecard. This is a requirement here as well, so we have to know in a handicap competition what each player is playing to. Now, in a situation where a committee will give a scorecard to somebody, if that scorecard is that handicap is incorrect on the scorecard, the player still has the responsibility to get that correct. So if I'm a 4 and the committee writes down a 6, and I see this and participate with that 4 or 6 handicap when I know I'm a 4, I'm going to end up being disqualified for playing at a handicap that is higher than what I should have recorded. So the committee is kind of off the hook in this situation. The player is always responsible to make sure that they have their handicap accurately represented on the scorecard. Okay, so as we're talking about here, the side's responsibility for each hole is the gross score of each. At least of one partner must be entered on the scorecard. Notice the requirement doesn't say both partners, it just says at least one. And there is no penalty for entering more than one partner's score on the scorecard. So again, here we've entered in both scores, doesn't matter, it's okay. The committee's going to figure out whose score counts. Each score on the scorecard must be clearly identified as the score of the individual partner who made it. If this is not done, the side is disqualified. So this is that situation where we need to have the scorecard individually identified with a number on the hole for that player. We can't just write a big 5 across both scores and say the side made a 5. We need to know who the individual player is, so in case there is a situation that arises within the rules, whether or not we're going to adjust that score after the round is over, or so on and so forth. But even if the scorecard is returned with that situation, what we've done at the KCGA over the years is said, all right, guys, this scorecard is incorrect. We're going to give it right back to you. Please identify it individually. And for example, if the card had the big numbers across both names, I would just say, hey, just put a dot in the player's box on each hole whose score it is. That would identify it individually so that they don't have to go through and erase everything and figure out what's going on. But they must be able to be identified individually. If not, you're going to be disqualified. And this really does fall on the committee as well as the players when that score is turned in. Like I said, at the scoring table for our events, if we see this scorecard, I immediately give it right back to them. I'm not going to let this get past me as a rules official at the scoring table. Okay, here's the example. It's not enough to identify the score for the side in general. Once you do this, again, we're going to get this fixed and taken care of. All right, only one partner needs to certify the whole scores in this situation, so both players are not required to sign the scorecard or certify it electronically if that is how this scorecard is to be returned. And it is the committee's responsibility to find out whose score counts for that hole. It is not the side's responsibility or the marker's responsibility. The committee is in charge of all those blue areas on the scorecard. So again, the math and which score counts is up to the committee, including applying the handicaps as well. If one score is entered, that score counts. If both scores are entered, the lowest score counts, or either if they are the same. So if we have a 4 and a 4, either score can count in that situation. And it is kind of important to note that, because if something happens where player A and player B both make a 4, and we find out later that A ends up getting a penalty there, we can go down and use B's score because it's the same score. But only if it is the same score. Okay, so we'll talk about that here very shortly, but if we don't know how to identify these numbers individually, we are going to disqualify the players. So talking about the individual score, if we have a player A that has a 4 and player B gets a 5, and then we have a penalty where player A ends up getting 2 strokes on that situation, the side score is going to become a 6. It's not going to be, we're not going to go to the next best score of 5, because what happened is we have signed and returned a scorecard for the score of 4, and then we find out, whoops, you had a 2-stroke penalty you didn't count, so you signed for player A's 4, but now we're going to put a 2-stroke penalty on player A. The side gets a 6 in that situation because the scores aren't the same. Now, if the scores were the same in that situation, for example, if player A makes a 4 and player B makes a 4, then we have a different situation because the scores are the same and we're going to apply the penalty to A but not to B, so the side would get a 4 in that situation. So it's only if the scores are the same that we can go and use the other score. We don't just get to go down to the next best score in that situation. All right, so when we're talking about when a round starts and ends, we do need that well defined so that we know where the players need to be when we start a round. A sides round starts when one of the players makes a stroke on their first hole, same as it was in individual stroke play or individual match play or foursomes. It's when that first stroke is made. But when does the round end? In match play, when either side has won the match, so we're done right there, whether or not it's on the 10th hole or the 18th hole or anywhere in between, the round ends when the match is over. Okay? In stroke play, when the side completes the final hole, either by both players holing out, or by one partner holing out on the final hole and the other partner choosing not to do so. So it's the process of 4-ball. When it happens on the 18th hole, we're going to define the round as complete when that last hole has been holed out. Okay? So in match play, a side has completed the hole when both partners have holed out or had their next strokes conceded, or either side has conceded the hole. So in match play, same situation right there, where if the hole is conceded, then obviously the hole's over, or if both players have holed out in that situation. In stroke play, a side has completed a hole when one of the partners has holed out and the other partner has either holed out or chooses not to do so for some reason. This rule is basically saying if somebody's in the hole, the other player does not have to finish. It's a good thing for pace of play, obviously. And the side may be represented by one partner during all or any part of the round. So if Jim and I are partners in a 4-ball event and I decide to sleep in for some reason, Jim tees off at 9 o'clock. Jim can play the whole round for us, which probably would work out great. But I can also join him during the round, and we will go over the times when I can join him. But there is no penalty in this situation of me missing the starting time, because 4-ball allows one person to represent the inside for any part of the round. Okay, so if the partner is absent and then arrives to play, that partner may start play for the side of the hole only between the play of 2 holes. So let's make sure that we understand there is a slight difference between match play and stroke play when the play of the hole begins. So in match play, before any player in match starts the hole. Now notice that says any player. It has nothing to do with the side. So if Jim and I are playing another side in match play and they have the hole, the honor, and they tee off, that hole has started, I cannot join until the next hole. Because the starting of the hole has commenced, the hole is being played, I cannot join during the play of the hole. So again, the words say only after the player on either side in the match has started the play of the hole, and that partner is not allowed to play for that side until the next hole. So in between the holes in match plays, that window closes a little bit quicker than it does in stroke play. So in stroke play, before other partner starts the hole. So in a stroke play event, if I show up on the 15th hole to join Jim, as long as he has not teed off on the 15th hole, I can go ahead and join and play the 15th hole, even if the other people in the group have teed off, because they're not our opponents, they are part of a stroke play field. So they are their side, we are our own side. So this talks about in this situation, I can join Jim as long as he hasn't started the play of the hole. So again, only after the other partner has started the play of the hole, the arriving partner is not allowed to play for the side until the next hole. All right, an arriving partner who is not allowed to play in a hole may still give advice. So I'm there, part of the side. I can go ahead and join Jim as far as a helper. I can read putts for him, carry his clubs, do all the advice things that I need to do. But I just can't make strokes for the side. But I can take other actions that are well within the rules, such as being the caddy. But if I do something where I join the play of the hole when I'm not allowed to, I am going to get the general penalty. In stroke play, it would be 2 strokes, and in match play, the side would lose the hole. All right, so let's talk about the partner's actions and how they affect the other partner's play. It's very important to understand what a partner and a player can do together and whether or not the rules are violated for one or both players. So although each player on the side must play his or her own ball, a player may take any action concerning the player's ball that the partner is allowed to take before making a stroke. And the examples are listed here in the rule, such as mark the spot of the ball, lift, replace, and drop, or place the ball. So we can basically say the partner is the player is the partner. Okay? A player and the player's caddy may help the partner in any way that the partner's caddy is allowed to help. So we're talking about all those situations that a caddy can help, such as to give and ask advice. So there's no penalty for me asking my partner for advice, which there shouldn't be, or asking my caddy or my partner's caddy for advice, or them giving me advice. We are all part of the same side. Any other actions that we are allowed to do under Rule 10 as far as caddies can be done between partners. Okay? But you must not give any help that the partner's caddy is not allowed to give under the rules. So like if, for example, if my caddy goes up to Jim and says, putt the ball here, and puts a big dent in the green to mark it, Jim's going to get a penalty even though that was my caddy making that action. So the rules are still covering everything in that situation and very commonsensical about how that is taken care of. Okay? In stroke play, partners must not agree with each other to leave a ball in place on the putting green. And this situation got a little bit of publication a few weeks ago where we had a couple of ladies playing in an LPGA Tour event, and one of them had chipped a ball up near the hole, and the other player went ahead and chipped, and they even agreed to leave the ball there to save time. And it was important that that agreement was notated to save time. That's the only reason they did it. They were asked about it, and they said, well, I just wanted her to hit, just so that I didn't have to go up there and mark it. There was no agreement for that ball to help. And this is where we're going to trust the player and the partner, not the partner in the situation, but the other player, to act with integrity within the rules. If they had left it in a helping position and for that reason, then we would have a penalty. But the whole reason why that ball was left there was just to speed up play. This is not what this rule talks about. This rule talks about a helping position. So in stroke play, partners must not agree with each other to leave a ball in place on the putting green to help either them or any other player. So the helping rule is now applied into the 4-ball rule of 23.5, where if Jim's ball comes to rest near the hole and he says, Todd, I'm going to leave that there for your next bunker stroke so that it could help your ball stop, and we agree, and I make the stroke, the side is going to get a penalty. Jim gets 2 strokes, I get 2 strokes for that situation. Now the stroke has to be made. This is a slight change in the way that we apply this rule. The old rule said as soon as we agreed on it, we were disqualified. Not even getting a 2-stroke penalty, and not even making a stroke. But the new rules are a little bit more friendly as far as the penalty situation. If we agree to it, we're not yet penalized until a stroke is made underneath this agreement. So we can unagree or fix this mistake before the stroke is made. Partner is responsible for the player's actions. Moving a little bit further, any action taken by the player concerning the partner's ball or equipment is treated as having been taken by the partner. So here's partner's the player, player's the partner. So if Jim kicks my ball in play in the fairway, I get a penalty because it's my ball. Jim is basically me within the rules of golf here. And so that situation is what 23.5b is talking about. Player's the partner, partner's the player again. If the player's actions would breach a rule if taken by the partner, and examples of this are when the player breaches the rules by improving the conditions affecting the stroke to be made by the partner. So if Jim comes along and sees my ball next to a divot and he kind of pushes the divot down and improves those cats, as we've talked about, conditions affecting the stroke, I'm going to get a penalty stroke in that situation. Actually, 2 penalty strokes in that situation. Accidentally causing the player's ball to move, I just gave an example, or failing to mark the spot of the partner's ball. So Jim is allowed to mark my ball and lift it on the putting green, but if he fails to mark it and he just picks it up, I'm going to get a 1-stroke penalty in that situation. And talk to my partner about possibly about reading the rule book. All right, so in 23.5b, moving on a little bit further, this also applies to the caddy. So again, I gave an example of my caddy breaching a rule for Jim's golf ball. So again, concerning the partner's golf ball that would breach a rule if taken by the player's partner or caddy is still covered. And again, if the actions of the player or the player's caddy affect the play of both the player's own ball and the partner's ball, we're going to see Rule 23.8a number 2 to find out if both players get a penalty. So we're going to talk about that very shortly, about 1 penalty or 2 penalties for the side. All right, so talking about order of play under 23.6, partners may play in the order they consider best. This rule has always been this way. It hasn't changed. But this means that when it is a player's turn to play under Rule 6.4a in match play or 6.4b in stroke play, either the player or his partner may play next. So again, the player's the partner's the player. If you have that 3-foot putt for par and you want to make sure we are in with a 4 and we've got a long birdie putt, we can be aggressive with the other player, it is okay for the player to go ahead and make that first stroke on the short one. We've done this for many years, but that's the best example that we always give about order of play. Now, it has to be reasonable. For example, if Jim hits his tee shots down the middle on the first hole, we can't have, hey, Jim, go ahead and hit your next shot to see if you knock it onto the green. So we're not allowed to, take these unreasonable actions. It's got to be reasonable in this situation. Okay? Exception. This is something that always comes up with this rule is continuing to play the hole after a stroke is conceded in match play. Whether or not we can practice once a ball has been conceded and when we can or cannot do this. So a player must not continue to play the hole after the player's next stroke has been conceded if this would help the partner. Okay? So for example, we have a situation here where the partner's ball is on the same line as the player and the player's stroke has been conceded. If she makes this stroke, that is obviously going to help the partner because he's going to be able to see the read, even though it's a 1-foot putt, but it's still going to help. Now, if this partner's ball was somewhere else and this player just went up and tapped it in, they are not in violation of Rule 23.6 because it didn't help. So it is very important to know where the partner's ball is. The best rule of thumb, as I always tell everybody, is just don't make a stroke until the hole is complete, which was defined earlier in the rule. All right, so if the player does so, his or her score for the hole stands without penalty, but the partner's score for the hole cannot count for the side. So in this example, this player goes ahead and has been conceded that 4 for that 1-foot putt. Her score will be 4, and if she makes that practice stroke, her partner has been disqualified from the hole. Doesn't matter what the partner's playing for. So that's how this rule would be applied. So it would be a loss of hole penalty in this match play, and it would apply to the person who is yet to hole out. Okay, so partners may share clubs, very similar to the rule that we talked about in foursomes, to allow partners to share clubs, again, as long as the total number is not 14. So 7 and 7 is okay, 13 and 13 is not okay. All right, so let's get into Rule 23.8 that talks about when a penalty applies to both partners or just one partner. And I think this rule has been really cleared up and makes it very simple to understand. We used to have a real tough understanding of whether or not it actually helped or didn't help or so on and so forth, but it really spells it out pretty succinctly here in the Rule 23.8, and we'll go over that. So when a player gets a penalty for a breach of rule, the penalty may apply to either that player alone or to both partners, so that is to the side. So the side would both get a penalty. And this depends on the penalty and the form of play. So first of all, the most important thing I think to really remember about this rule is this first bullet point talking about penalty normally applies to only the player. And this is true. In most situations, if a player makes a penalty on themselves, it is not going to affect their partner. There are, I think, 3 examples that we're going to talk about where it does apply to the partner. But in general, that player is only going to get the penalty. So, for example, when a player gets a penalty other than disqualification, that penalty normally applies to the player and not to his or her partner, except the situations covered by Section 2 that we're going to talk about very shortly. So, any penalty strokes are added to only that player's score and not to the partner's score. So again, in 4-ball, the individual scores do matter. Foursomes is a different situation, which is why 23.8 only applies to 4-ball. So let's talk about match play. A player who gets the general penalty, which is a loss of hole in match play, has no score that can count for that hole, but this penalty has no effect on the partner who may continue play for side for that hole. For example, if I take a practice swing in a bunker during a match, that is a loss of hole penalty. It's not going to affect Jim at all, my partner, and he may continue to play for the hole. Okay? Here are those 3 situations where a penalty to a player also applies to the partner, and they're listed out in the rule and very straightforward. First of all, 1 of 3. When a player breaches Rule 4.1b, the limit of 14 clubs, the shared or the added or replacement clubs, in match play, the side gets the penalty, which is the adjustment of the match situation. So if we are playing a match and we get to the second tee and we find out that Jim has 15 clubs in his bag and I only have 14, the side is going to be penalized in this situation. So if we win the first hole, we are going to have that adjustment made based on this penalty. not just a loss of hole penalty. This is, again, an adjustment penalty. Now, in stroke play, the partner will also get the penalty. So if we're playing a stroke play event and we get to that second tee where Jim has 15 clubs and I only have 14, we're going to get a 2-stroke penalty, each of us, on the first hole for having 15 clubs. So Jim's 4 becomes a 6, my 8 becomes a 10 in that situation. And then we haven't started to play the next hole, so that penalty wouldn't apply moving forward. The second example in this situation is that will affect both the partner and the player is if the partner also gets the same penalty as the player. So let's talk about that. For example, if Jim goes into a bunker and fixes all this stuff around his ball, but it also fixes stuff next to my ball that was laying there. So Jim's actions, although it was one action, helps both of us. We both get a penalty in that situation. A very rare situation where both players would be helped by one action, but if that situation where the partner will get the same penalty is if that action helped them in that situation. Okay, so again, we're talking about the helping. But if Jim went in and fixed like a bunker and raked some stuff around his ball, and my ball was 6 or 7 feet off to the side and it didn't help me, then I don't get a penalty. So again, the action has to physically help both players in that situation to get a penalty. So in match play, when the player's breach hurts an opponent's play, the partner also gets the same penalty as the player. So in a situation where we affect our opponent's rights or do something that hurts our opponent's play, whether it's just one of us, the entire side gets penalized in that situation because we've hurt our opponent's situation there. So it's a very rare situation again, but it's important to point these 3 situations out here that generally the player is only going to get the penalty and the partner is not going to be, except for these 3 situations. Okay. So again, a player who's made a stroke at a wrong ball is not treated as helping the partner's play or hurt his opponent's play. And this is a very important exception that they put in the rules that was never there before. And this is, again, when I mentioned the confusion that we had before in certain situations of when to apply a penalty. Well, now the new rules strictly says, well, if you play a wrong ball, no penalty to your partner, even if it helps. And the example is if Jim's ball is on the fringe and my ball is right next to Jim's ball and I go up and I play Jim's ball, that's a wrong ball penalty, I get 2 strokes, and Jim watches my ball roll on the same line as the stroke that he's going to play, he is helped by that, but this exception says only the player gets the penalty in this situation. So very important exception that is really written out very specifically in 23.8. Again, this is true whether the ball played as a wrong ball belongs to my partner or the opponent or any other ball in that situation. So only one penalty applied there. Okay, so let's talk about some disqualification penalties. Okay, when do these apply for one player and when do they apply for the side? So when a breach by one partner means the side is disqualified, and this list looks very similar to what the lists that have been in the rules of golf for a while, and it's just here, and one of the good things about lists are you don't have to memorize them. It's right there in the book for you to go look them up if you want to look them up. So here are the rules that would apply. So if either partner gets a penalty of disqualification under any of these rules, then the side is disqualified for this. So for example, club allowed in making a stroke. If Jim is my partner and makes a stroke with a non-conforming club and gets the disqualification penalty, now keep in mind some of these penalties, the first penalty isn't disqualification. Okay, there might be a general penalty, but if the disqualification penalty is applied by breaking any of these rules to one player, the side is disqualified. So if he does get the DQ penalty for using a non-conforming club that second time, then the side is disqualified. That first time is a general penalty and he just gets the penalty in that situation. But again, once the DQ is applied to the side underneath this rule, then the side is disqualified. And there's the list of the other ones that we can have you go over within the rule book. Okay? So a side is disqualified in match play only if applying handicaps in a handicap match is done wrong and the side gets disqualified. So for example, again, if I'm a 4 and I put down 6 on the scorecard and we play this match and understand that I get 6 strokes, the side is going to be disqualified because it does affect how the whole match is gone. Even though if Jim did nothing wrong as my partner, he is still part of this situation where the other side understands that I'm getting 6 strokes and their strategy might be different because there's 2 other holes out there that I was taking strokes that I was not entitled to. So the side gets disqualified in that situation in match play. And then stroke play only, so we have some specific stroke play disqualifications that would go on, these 5 rules right here. So for example, let's look at the bottom there, the side scorecard and stroke play. Okay? So if we turn in our scorecard and Jim made a 4 on number 1 and I made a 4 on number 1 and we wrote down a 3 for Jim and we turned it in, we're going to get disqualified for signing for a wrong scorecard. We can't just go down and take Todd's 4 in that situation because we've signed for a 3 and we knew that we were signing for a wrong scorecard. So again, once the disqualification penalty is applied underneath any of these rules to one player in stroke play, the side gets disqualified. Okay? When they're breached by both partners for disqualification means the side is disqualified. A much shorter list because both players have to do it, starting and ending a round. So basically, if we're both not there within 5 minutes of our starting time, the side is disqualified. Makes perfect sense in that situation. Playing in groups. So if Jim and I are playing with another twosome and we just for some reason say we want to go play with somebody else, we're not allowed to do that unless the committee okays that. So if we go play in a different group, we're disqualified in that situation, both of us. So, all right, in stroke play only, a side is disqualified if at the same hole, so we're talking now not only about a round but a specific hole, both partners get penalties of disqualification under any of these rules. So it doesn't have to be the same rule, but it can be any combination of these rules. Best example is failure to hole out. If Jim hits a ball up to the hole and says, well, I'm just going to pick it up since you're putting for a 4, and he looks over at me and I'm holding my ball in my hand, it's like, Jim, I already picked up 2. And we say, screw it, let's go to the next hole. And we tee off. Now we're going to get disqualified because we both didn't hole out. Situation here also with a wrong ball. So like if Jim plays a wrong ball and doesn't correct it, and he tees off in the next hole, he gets disqualified. If I do it also, we're going to get disqualified. But only if Jim does it, he's only going to get the penalty. But if we both do it, according to 23.8b, we would both be violating this rule and both be disqualified. So you can see a number of rules there also that would fall underneath this rule. Where breached by one player means only that player has no score for a hole in stroke play. So in all other situations where a player breaches a rule with a penalty of disqualification, the player is not disqualified. As I just mentioned with the wrong ball situation. If one of the partners doesn't correct the situation of playing a wrong ball, the side is okay moving forward. Just one player will not have a score for the hole, but the side can keep on going in that situation. Okay? In match play, if both partners breach such a rule in the same hole, the side loses the hole. So if we have those situations happen where one player gets a loss of hole penalty, he's out, but the other player can continue. But if both players create a penalty, which is a disqualification, then it's just a loss of hole in that situation. We lose that hole, we can move on to the next hole. All right, so let's talk about a question for Rule 23 here. In a 4-ball stroke play event, Todd and Taylor are partners. Todd makes a 4 and Taylor makes a 5 on hole 13. And they are correctly written down on the return scorecard. Notice I've underlined return scorecard, meaning that we are done with the round and we have moved on. It's official. It is then determined that Todd actually made a 5 on hole 13. He forgot to include a penalty stroke he knew he got for moving his ball in play, which is the following is correct. So I've written down a 4 and signed for it, and Taylor has a 5, but I actually made a 5. Okay, so I assigned a wrong scorecard knowingly in that situation. So what are we going to do? Here's our situations. Todd's score is adjusted to a 5 with no further penalties. Is that an option? Todd's score is adjusted to a 5 plus the 2-stroke penalty for a wrong scorecard. The side will get a 7. Or Taylor's score of 5 now stands, or is the side disqualified? So this is an interesting situation in which some of these things might seem very viable, but what happens is the side is going to be disqualified in this situation because we had signed for a 4 and I know that I made a 5. It says there in the example that I forgot to include the penalty I knew I got. Now if I didn't know I got the penalty, that's a different situation where we wouldn't be disqualified and the penalty would be applied. But because we did certify a scorecard with a score that was actually lower than we made, the side is disqualified, and Taylor then asked Jim to be his partner the next time. All right, so let's move into Rule 24. We're in the final rule of the rule book here, and this is a new rule, completely brand new with some different things that talk about team competitions. Rules 1 through 20, again, are going to apply, but there's going to be some different situations that we apply to an advice giver, which is a new term in the rules of golf, and how teams work together as a team, but might not necessarily be partners. So we'll be specifically going into that. So that's the overview of the team competition. We're going to talk about the terms of the team competition, how teams score, for example, in high schools. You usually have 6 players play and the low 4 scores count. That's what we're talking about. The team captain, what his or her responsibilities might be and what he may or may not be able to do during the round. And then advice allowed in a team competition, what can happen there. So the notable changes is this change is a brand new rule. It's a topic not previously addressed in the rules. Now it does have it covered in the rules. The term advice giver, again, is a new rule, or excuse me, a new term used to refer to an individual or individuals in a team competition who may give advice to all the players. So long as there is no individual component in a team competition, a local rule can be used allowing teammates in the same group to give each other advice. So again, that's in a situation where there is no individual low score, but there's a team competition, and since they are teammates, they are not partners. They're not playing in a 4-ball or anything like that. Their own score counts, and then we add it up to make a team score. So that's where that local rule could be applied. So Rule 24 covers team competitions where multiple players or sides compete as a team. College and high school is really what we're talking about in this situation, with the results of their rounds or matches combined to produce an overall team score. All right, so a team is a group of players who plays individual or sides to compete against other teams, and their play in the team event may also be part of another competition, such as individual stroke play, which is generally the case in all competitions for college and high school, where you have the one player playing with the one player of another school, and their individual score counts for their individual event, as well as the combined score for the team. Okay, and this always takes place at the same time. And the first 23 rules of the rules of golf apply in the team competition, except as we've modified them here moving forward. Okay, so the committee decides the form of play, such as stroke play, match play, or it could be par or bogey, Stableford, alternate shot, all these different things. How a team's overall score is to be calculated, such as the best 4 of 6, and other terms of the competition, such as match play, the number of points awarded for winning a match or tying a match. So when you're talking about, for example, the Curtis Cup matches, most of the time you'll see 1 point for a win, half a point for a tie. In stroke play, the number of strokes to count for each team's total scores, we mentioned a couple times, and whether the competition may end in a tie or if a playoff is going to be necessary if we don't want it to end in a tie. Okay, the team captain. So the team captain is a very interesting individual within the rules of golf. Each team may name a team captain to lead the team and make decisions for it, such as which players will play, which rounds or matches, and which order they will play, and who will maybe be partners if they were playing a 4-ball event, or so on and so forth. And the team captain may be a player in the competition. Nothing that doesn't surprise us here. But we do need to make sure that we understand that the team captain is not necessarily able to give advice. So that's why the new term advice giver is introduced into the rules of golf. It is something that has been used before by colleges and high schools, but now specifically addressed in the rules of golf under 24.4. So a person allowed to give advice to a team is called the advice giver, and the committee may adopt a local rule allowing each team to name one person as that advice giver. Okay? Who may give advice and other help as allowed in Rule 10.2b2. So it's the players of one team during the round, and who may be asked for advice by players. So this is a person who is specifically out there for advice. So and it's generally going to be a coach in that situation. So if you have a coach walking around amongst the groups, that coach may give advice to the players, and the players may ask the coach for advice as long as that person is identified as the advice giver. Okay, so the person allowed to give advice, again, may be the team captain as well, a team coach, or another person. It could be just somebody else, including a team member playing in the competition. Now keep in mind, the advice giver must be identified to the committee before giving advice. So we have to know who this person is, otherwise we could have some complications within the rules. And the committee may allow a team's advice giver to change during the round or during the competition, so it's not something set in stone. So here's the important distinction between maybe a team captain and an advice giver. If the team's advice giver is a player on the team, he or she is not allowed to act in that role while themselves playing in the competition. So if I'm the team's advice giver and the number 1 player on the team and I am playing out there, I cannot help out my fellow teammates by giving them advice because I am playing in the competition. Once my round is complete, I can go ahead and become the advice giver in the way that the terms really want me to be the advice giver. So while playing around, again, the advice giver is treated like any other member, any other playing team member for the purposes of the restriction on advice under Rule 10.2a. So again, cannot give advice while you are playing. Okay, except when playing together as partners on a side. So again, if you're always a partner, you can always give advice. That's the way that it works. We're not going to allow advice to be cut off between partners within the rules of golf. That would be a local rule that would be put in place that would not be allowed It is a rule of golf to allow partners to exchange information. But a player must not must not ask for advice from or give advice to a member of his or her team playing on the course. So that's important to know that moving forward. This applies whether the team member is playing in the same group as the player or another group on the golf course. So pretty much ad nauseum, I'm really pointing out that we must make sure that even if you are the advice giver, you are not a partner. Teammates and partners are completely different from each other. Teammates may not give advice to each other, partners may. Okay. Penalty for breach of this rule is the general penalty under 24.4, which is also the same penalty under giving advice. All right, so a rule for the advice question here. In a Kansas City Cup match, Bailey is the designated team captain and advice giver playing the 8th hole in her singles match. As her teammate Jackie is playing the 6th hole, Bailey says to her, hit a 7-iron at number 7, it is way downhill. So which of the following is correct? So in this situation, has Bailey violated the rule of advice? And the answer is yes. She has given advice while playing around. Even though she's designated as the team captain and the advice giver, we now know that she cannot give advice. So we do know that Bailey's going to get a penalty, and so she's going to lose the 8th hole in her match, the hole that she is playing, and there's no penalty to Jackie. So Jackie's off the hook in this situation because, remember, advice is a violation if you give it or you ask for it, not necessarily receiving it. So receiving advice is not a penalty unless you solicit it. My greatest example I always give for that is if you're at a PGA Tour event and you yell out, "Tiger, hit a driver," we can't penalize Tiger in that situation because he got advice. And by the way, he doesn't need your advice. He's doing just fine without you. So to answer this question, Bailey may not give advice and gets the general penalty for the loss of hole. Jackie doesn't get a penalty for receiving advice, as I just said, but Jackie does need to take some action to let this not happen again. Jackie is to say something like, hey, you can't give me advice, so on and so forth. But if Bailey keeps giving Jackie advice and Jackie allows that to happen, then Jackie may be getting a penalty for the advice rule. All right, so that's all of our talk about the rules 1 through 24. So let's go over the quiz review to make sure that everybody understands the questions that we gave you earlier. We'll start off with our normal true-false. True or false, a player picks up on a hole in Stableford without holing is disqualified. As we know now, that is false. A player will receive 0 points for failure to hole out. So a stroke play event without holing out is not disqualification when you are playing in a Stableford. True or false, a maximum score may only be a gross score, not a net score. And as we know, that is false. The committee may set a net score as well. But keep in mind that maximum score and ESC, equitable stroke control, are a little different from each other. When we're playing an event with maximum score, your score for that gross event can be capped. ESC is based on when you're posting your score to the handicap system. So like if you have a maximum score of 10 and you are a single digit handicap and you make a score of a 12 on a hole, for the tournament you're going to write down 10 or 12 and let the committee make sure that you have a 10. But your posting is going to be that double bogey. So that's where equitable stroke control, when you actually post the score to GIN, is different than maximum score. And a lot of people will probably have a little bit of confusion with that for a while until we really get into the new rules. True or false, a player who plays outside the teeing area in a maximum score event is not disqualified if he or she fails to correct the error under Rule 6.1b2. And as we know now, that is true. The player is only going to get the maximum score penalty in this situation, and it's not even a penalty, but they're not going to be disqualified for failure to correct the error. True or false, par bogey competitions are match play formats based on holes won versus a fixed score. And read the question carefully. This is false. It is not a match play format. It is only match play scoring. And it's match play scoring to a degree. It's not exactly the same as match play scoring. So again, par bogey competitions are stroke play events with a similar scorekeeping method to match play. Question number 2, in a match play foursome event, Bailey and Doug are partners. Doug's tee shot comes to rest in a red penalty area. Of course it does. He drops his substituted ball in the right way and in the right place, and Bailey makes the next stroke. After the one-stroke penalty is applied for dropping the ball from the penalty area, which of the following is correct? Well, as we know now, Bailey or Doug may drop the ball, depending. It doesn't matter who's going to play the stroke, so there's going to be no additional penalty in this situation. The procedure is correct under Rule 22.2. Any player in a foursome event may drop the ball to be played. Question number 3, in a stroke play event, Todd and Taylor are partners. Todd is in with a 6, and Taylor is putting for a 3. Taylor has marked, lifted, and replaced her ball in the putting green when a gust of wind blows her ball 3 feet closer to the hole. Todd grabs her ball while it is in rolling and replaces it. Taylor then holds the putt. Which of the following is correct? So as we know, once we've lifted and marked and replaced the ball, that ball is going to be played from that spot on the putting green no matter what happens, even if the natural forces move the ball, which it did in this case. So once the ball is moved, it is okay to pick up the moving ball and replace it. And Todd, being Taylor's partner, is allowed to replace the ball. So the player is the partner is the player, so there's no penalty in that situation. So Taylor's score for 3 will count for the side in that situation. The procedure is correct, no penalties involved there. Once the ball is moved, it must be replaced, so we're all in good situation there. Question number 4, in a 3-round stroke play team and individual event, Bailey is a team member playing in round 3. Bailey fails to hole out on hole 4 and tees off on hole 5. Which of the following is correct? Well, we know now that she's going to be disqualified because she failed to hole out on a hole and teed off on the next hole, but her rounds 1 and 2 still can count for the team score. But now she's disqualified completely for the individual event, and her score cannot be used for a team score in round 3. But rounds 1 and 2 will still apply for her. Question number 5. In 4-ball stroke play, Jackie and Bailey are partners. Both players have a ball on the fringe in 2 strokes. Jackie puts the ball from the fringe, and Bailey watches closely to see how it will break, and it goes in the hole. As Jackie pulls the ball out of the cup, she realizes it's Bailey's ball. So which of the following is correct? This is something we've talked about earlier here. We do have a wrong ball penalty for Jackie. She's penalized 2 strokes, but there's no penalty to Bailey under Rule 23.8A2. Even though Bailey was helped by this situation, specifically says in this rule, playing a wrong ball, the partner will not get a penalty in this situation. All right, to finish up the true or false questions. True or false, a player is always penalized if they make a stroke after the opponent makes a concession. Again, with the true or false questions, the word always is kind of a key there. We got to make sure that all situations are covered for it to be true, and this is again false. If the continuing play of a hole does not help your partner or unreasonably delays play, there is no penalty. So in that situation where if my putt is conceded and Jim, my partner, has a putt on a completely different line and I tap it in, there is no penalty to either one of us in that situation. It didn't help, and continuing the play of the hole is allowed within the rules of golf. If a player and a partner agree to leave a ball in a position to help the player and a stroke is made, only the player gets the general penalty. True or false? And as we have seen, that is false. Both players who make the agreement are going to get penalized in this situation. Whether they're player and partner or player and another player in a stroke play event, the agreement between 2 players and the stroke is made, both players will get a penalty in that situation. So true or false, without penalty, advice givers may stand behind a player when they are taking the stance for a stroke. This is the alignment rule, and the answer is true. A player will get the maximum score in this situation. Okay, so we talked about this before, where we have somebody that's lining up a partner, they're going to get a penalty, and we're also going to have something that happens with the maximum score. So, but again, without penalty, advice givers may stand behind a player when they are taking a stance for a stroke is false. Okay, a player cannot have anybody back there, whether it's a partner, advice giver, caddy, so on and so forth. We're not allowing anybody to get back there in that situation. All right, so true or false, in 4-ball, if a player is DQ'd for unreasonable delay, his partner may continue play by himself. True or false? And that answer is false. A disqualification penalty under Rule 5.6a DQs the side, not just the player. That's one of those examples where if one partner gets the penalty there underneath the disqualification, both partners are disqualified in that situation. Okay, and that's it for our quiz review and for all of our rules. Thank you. If you have any questions, please email me, todd@kcgolf.org, and we will see everybody in the fall of 2019 to go over this all over again. Thank you.